Hi everyone and welcome back to LSAT Insights 3, and today we'll be addressing what does it cost to beat the LSAT. So last time we talked a lot about plateaus and ceilings and whether or not someone can score a 170. In my experience, if your current plateau is in the mid 150s, you can feasibly reach the mid 160s given enough time and effort, but 170 is not likely. That's just the statistical outcome that I've seen. If your current plateau happens to be in the mid 160s, you can more feasibly reach 170 plus given enough time and effort. I was also quite clear, hopefully clear at least, that this is just my teaching experience, and you can't automatically apply that simple sort of rubric to yourself. Why is that? That's because, as I alluded to last time, there is a better question to ask other than just simply, can I get X score by testing. So most people, when asking me if they can reach X score, are actually asking me if I think they have the raw brain powers to score that high. In that context, the can I reach X score question only focuses on what I consider one of the three main costs everyone has to pay to reach any score. The first cost is time, and I consider this far and away, no contest, the most important resource, in my opinion. In a somewhat distant second is effort. This is most directly related to the raw brain powers thing that people are asking me about. And in a distant third comes money. It's far and away the least important resource. It's so unimportant that I'm not really even going to address it here. So you tend to know how much time you have. You have one or two test dates in mind, and so you consider that a fixed resource most of the time. And you also know how much money you have. That's just looking at your bank account, right? But your cognitive ability is probably the one resource you have the least tangible, numberized grasp of. And that's why, when I listen carefully, most people are actually asking me about that because that's the one thing that they don't really know. Because you know how much time, you know how much money that you have, you know those things. So really, your curiosity is really about how much effort do I need to put in, given all that other stuff, to reach a goal. So let's start right up with time. Why do I rank time so highly compared to the other resources? For starters, it's the least negotiable of the three for most of us. Many of us, myself included when I was doing this, don't really have the luxury of a gap year to just inflate on demand the amount of time that we have to prepare. But more importantly, many of the other things in life that also draw on that same pool of time that we have, those competing priorities are often uncompromising. You can't just stop showing up to work for a lot of us. You can't just stop showing up to class, otherwise you'll fail them, that sort of thing. There's just certain things that you have to do with the same amount of time that you have to share between study and all these other things that you just can't skimp on. And that's probably the most damaging thing about not having enough time. And finally, having more time can really help you save on the effort and money part of the equation. But the reverse conversion isn't quite as true. You could have all the money in the world, but that still won't really significantly reduce the amount of time and effort you have to put in because those things are just there and not really that compromising. The same thing is with effort. It doesn't matter if you're willing to put in like 12 hours a day. That just doesn't give you quite as much leeway to save both money and time, but especially time. The reverse conversion, having more effort and having more money, really doesn't allow you to save on time. Some of these things just take time to sink in. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but long story short, start as soon as possible. The fact that you're here means that you've already started, but hopefully this will just simply reinforce the idea that time is absolutely of the essence. So some more specific timetables that I have for you here. The ideal timetable that I like to use, and it's the one that personally that I enjoyed when I was studying for my exam, is 2 years. It sounds like a long time, it kind of is, but that's the point. It gives you a lot of room to work. Full stop, I do think that almost anyone can reach their best score within this amount of time. The flexibility that this gives is also quite nice. So many different study styles, particularly self-study, but videos, live tutoring, whatever you want to do, all of those are really viable within this window. However, what is more typical, I find, is that people give themselves about a year, give or take a few weeks or months maybe, to get ready for this thing. Compared to a 2-year person, you will probably be studying a lot more per week. That's just how it works. And you have to do that because you're hedging against the fact that you have about half the ideal amount of time to do. So in my particular case, when I was studying, I had 2 full years, and my friends who were peers in college, they maybe gave themselves a year. And in comparison to them, maybe they had a family thing that came up, or there's various other interruptions. I had those same things, but because I had 2 years to space it out, it wasn't quite as crippling, whereas it was full-on panic attack inducing for some of these people who didn't have quite the cushion that I did. And on that subject, if you happen to be in school, most of you are, self-study is going to be a lot tougher to pull off within this time frame. It's still not going to be that bad, but it will be pretty difficult to do within a year because, as we discussed, so many things are competing for your time and effort. An even more compressed schedule, though, is about 10 weeks, which is 2 months and some change. So when it comes to students who start from zero, so basically the only thing they've done is a full-length exam as a diagnostic, I've been able to take those people who are 150s in that position into the 160s, and also people who are essentially starting at zero and are 160 scores on their diagnostic into the 170s within that time frame. It's not fun, but I've done it enough times to know that it can be pulled off. But if you're pretty much starting from scratch and trying to do this in 10 weeks, self-study is essentially off the table. If you're the kind of person watching this, chances are you do need someone else like me who knows what they're doing to guide you through those 10 weeks all the way. My students who have a longer time to prepare, who have been studying on their own for months and months before coming to me, are in, of course, the more typical around 1 year pattern, but they do come to me for their final 10 weeks, and that is generally probably the best compromise on this entire slide. Maybe you have just about 1 academic year to do it, and you spend about 10 weeks of that with somebody like me. To me, that's the ideal thing. But for somebody who only has just the 10 weeks and hasn't had like that months and months of buildup, I can still kind of adapt my normal 10-week schedule to work for somebody like that, but it requires a significantly higher amount of commitment per week. Maybe we'll have, instead of just 2 hours of meetings, we'll have 3 to 4 hours of live meetings per week, which of course is more money out of your pocket. But in addition, I will probably by necessity have to assign you a little bit more homework, so to speak. But it gets even tighter, like your test is in 3 days tighter. Now, some people do try to talk to me within just a few days of their exam, and I want to emphasize it's not always a bad idea. This is only worth doing if you're looking to rise just a single-digit number of points if you're lucky. And also, obviously, if you start from zero, starting from 0 to 3 days isn't really going to get you anywhere, obviously. This is really only for people who have done everything, are pretty well prepared, but they feel like they're just missing some small thing that can get them a few more points, and especially if you're kind of on the cusp of moving into a better percentile, but you just want a further push forward. This can work out. There is usually something that I can do to help. So we've gone over time, the most important resource. The second most important one is effort. And here's the problem. Many people think that just purely elbow grease, a can-do attitude, sticking to a schedule, doing absolutely massive amounts of questions, is really all that effort is or is constituted of. Unfortunately, the effectiveness of all of that stuff is highly dependent on how naturally suited your brain is to performing the logic demanded by the exam. So I'm not actually going to discuss everything on this slide in great detail. Feel free to pause and read it if you're into it, but really the most important thing is that there's some typical markers of what people call, quote, intelligence, and I think that really boils down to processing speed. And processing speed I have found over the years to be something that's very difficult to change in a lot of the time frames that I've listed. And likewise, like the last slide, I'm not actually going to discuss this one, but I do want to share the good news related to what we saw from the bad news on the previous page. So I said processing speed is something that I've found matters to the exam, and it's also something that I find difficult to move or change based on most of the time frames that I described. But as hard as it is to magically get smarter, you don't have to. Dumbing down the exam is my particular specialty, and I'm far from the only one. There are other folks out there. I think LSAT Demon in particular also has a fairly intuitive approach. I just happen to be a little bit more annoying and insistent about it. But yeah, that's the good news. It's harder to get smarter, but the good news is you don't actually have to get smarter. So if you don't actually have to get smarter, how do we manipulate the effort variable, right? And that's what brings me to what I would consider not the good news, not the bad news, but the real news. The real news is that what you actually need to do to get X score completely depends on how much time you have. We've discussed time. And the amount and type of effort you need to put in. When it comes to the amount of effort, that's not really something that we can do much about. It's kind of up to the genetic lottery, which is the only thing that really solves that is time. That pressure is greatly eased by having more time. Maybe if you have 2 years, you can actually move the needle on your processing speed by doing some extra drills outside of the LSAT. They're just sort of like brain power drills. I'm not going to exclude that possibility. But no matter what, having more time either lets you just ignore this issue of the genetic lottery and how it's treated you when it comes to this exam, or it actually might even give you enough time to maybe even try increasing that a little bit. But much more important than that, because like I said, the only thing that really has any chance of changing the genetic lottery output that you have is time, and sometimes you just don't have a full 2 years, right? Maybe you just started too late, and you just can't get more time. But the type of effort, as opposed to the amount of effort that we just talked about, the type of effort is something that you and I can change immediately. And so what I'm about to say here should be familiar to any of you who have already seen the previous installment in my Insight series. So when we talk about type of effort, this is what I'm talking about. To reach the mid 160s, all you really need is technique. There's a lot of it out there, and doing stuff like mindlessly and sort of in a disciplined manner, drilling questions can get you there. And also, as I discussed last time, to reach the mid 170s, usually what you need more so than just raw technique and practice is talking to someone who knows what they're doing. You likely need something more akin to an attitude adjustment rather than new techniques. Very few places will pre-record discussions directly addressing the type of thing that you really need. I would hope that my content proves to be something of an exception, but what I found from the experience of pre-recording some of my own stuff, as much as I am focused on what I consider the things that 170 scorers actually need to move up from 160 to 170, the process of pre-recording things by necessity kind of dilutes that and makes it difficult to not focus on technique instead of the attitude adjustments that I just said that you needed. But either way, this sort of the type of effort matters much more than just the raw amount of effort you need. And this is, I would say, a more proper context of where effort falls in the overall spectrum of the personal price you have to pay to get to a score that you want. So now that we've covered both the time and effort costs and how they kind of relate to each other, time to talk about next steps. Very much the same as last time. Talk to somebody. Hopefully, whoever you end up talking to is very cognizant and experienced when it comes to assessing the cost of getting you your goal score. It doesn't mean that you have to sit them down and run them through this slideshow just to make sure that they're on the same page as you. But hopefully, they are at least as aware as you are. Most likely, very much more because they'll probably be experienced. In terms of being able to assess, okay, this is how much time they have, this is what their data is telling us, this is probably where you're going to end up given a typical amount of effort. They'll be able to accurately assess that for you. But as I was just saying a second ago, nobody that I know of is a psychic, so they're going to have to see at least a diagnostic to have any clue. Try to have at least that much done before talking to somebody. Again, I realize I'm preaching to the choir. Those of you who care enough to watch this sort of thing very likely have much more than just a single diagnostic. So just be aware that bring as much data as possible. Maybe the person you're talking to won't ask for all of it, but they should at least ask for some of it. It should be a red flag to you if somebody is just like, no, I don't need to see it. I've seen, all I need to do is hear what your diagnostic is and how long you've been doing it. I can figure it out from there. I'm not saying that it's impossible to know what your costs are and give you a good assessment based on just that one number, that one diagnostic. But if they're not asking for, any sort of analytical data and work, now chances are they're just trying to one size fits all you to some extent. And again, I'm not saying that that's impossible to get you a good result, but I think it reduces the likelihood of you getting what you want. So I kind of raced through this one, again, because I'm still not fully convinced of the value of this, because so much of what I said has been preaching to the choir. You obviously know that time is important, you obviously know that effort is important, and you have probably figured out that time is pretty significant and heavy and hard to manipulate and get more of, and so that's why you're naturally focusing on effort. So no, I get that you guys all probably know that. It's just that I was hoping that this presentation gave you some context when you do reach out to somebody and are looking for help, that you're on the lookout for, do they actually care about my data? Do they actually care to figure out what I need rather than just trying to fit you into whatever curriculum box that they've gotten used to working with. So hopefully you got at least that much out of it. But of course, thank you for watching. Thanks for sticking with this video as long as you have. Like and subscribe if you haven't. Help me grow. Help me reach more people. That's why I'm doing this. I will see you in the next one.